Today we will dive into a controversial and sensitive topic on the effects of colonialism, the underdevelopment of the colonized, and how postcolonialism impacted our behavior and thoughts about the other, making them subhuman and uncivilized in our thoughts and narrative. Despite the end of colonialism, foreign ownership persists with foreigners owning land, mines, factories, banks, and more. France, for example, without a single gold mine domestically, has the fourth largest gold reserves. Mali, which was occupied by France, lacks gold reserves in its banks despite having 860 gold mines producing 50 tons yearly. The products we love, like smartphones and electric vehicles, often rely on cobalt mined in harsh slave-like conditions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Nike uses sweatshops in East Asia, Zara exploits the Uyghur population, and Shell exploits the Niger Delta for oil, causing pollution and endangering the livelihood of the native population. India and Madagascar export mica used in makeup and electronics, with much mining in illegal and harmful conditions. The list is endless.
Makeup can be a tool for liberation and expression. It can make us feel beautiful. But one of beauty's most popular ingredients has a dark side.
जब हम लोग माइंस की खदानों में जब घुसते हैं तो वहाँ पे बहुत अंधेरा भी दिखाई देता है और हम लोग को बहुत डर भी लगता है कि हम लोग पता ना कि किधर से क्या गिर जाए। मैंने देखा बहुत सारे बच्चे को, एक बच्चा का भी माथा फटा था।
When children are the hidden cost in our cosmetics, who's stepping in to help them out?
पढ़ेंगे तब तो बनेंगे।
And who's leaving them behind?
Frantz Fanon wrote in his book The Wretched of the Earth, quote, "The settler's town is a well-fed town, an easygoing town. Its belly is always full of good things. The settler's town is a town of white people, of foreigners. The town belonging to the colonized people, or at least the native town, the Negro village, the Medina, the reservation is a place of ill fame, peopled by men of evil repute. They are born there, it matters little where or how. They die there, it matters not where nor how. It is a world without spaciousness. Men live there on top of each other, and their huts are built one on top of the other. The native town is a hungry town, starved of bread, of meat, of shoes, of coal, of light. The native town is a crouching village, a town on its knees, a town wallowing in the mire. It is a town of Negroes and Arabs." End quote. Quote, "The church in the colonies is the white people's church, the foreigner's church. She doesn't call the native to God's ways, but to the ways of the white man, of the master, of the oppressor. It dehumanizes the native, or to speak plainly, it turns him into an animal. In fact, the terms the settler uses when he mentions the native are zoological terms. He speaks of the yellow man's reptilian motions, of the stink of the native quarter, of breeding swarms, of fullness, of spawn, of gesticulations. General de Gaulle speaks of the yellow multitudes, and François Mauriac of the black, brown, and yellow masses which soon will be unleashed. The native knows all this and laughs to himself every time he spots an allusion to the animal world in the other's words. For he knows that he is not an animal, and it is precisely at the moment he realizes his humanity that he begins to sharpen the weapons with which he will secure its victory. As we know, the Western world is far more developed than the East or Global South. More innovation, better economy, but what does it mean to be developed? What is development? Did the West develop on its own? What about the rest of the world? Development in society is a complex process. On an individual level, it means improving skills, gaining more freedom, being creative, self-disciplined, responsible, and achieving material well-being. The progress of personal development is closely linked to the overall state of society. Throughout history, people formed groups for hunting and survival, and the relationships within these groups are vital for understanding society. While development is often used in an economic sense, economic development is about society collectively enhancing its ability to interact with the environment. This improvement relies on understanding natural laws or science, applying that knowledge through tools, technology, and organizing work in an effective way. Over the long term, human society has continually developed economically by increasing its capacity to extract a living from nature. Throughout history, every part of the world faced temporary setbacks and sometimes a drop in the ability to make essential things for the people. In ancient China, for example, people depended on nature, but over time they learned important things like how to make fire and plant seeds for food. These discoveries led to basic farming communities in China using stone tools, producing enough for basic needs. When two different societies meet and interact for a long time, it seriously changes both of them, creating entirely new patterns. There are two general rules in these situations. First, the weaker society with less economic power usually suffers negative effects, especially if the gap between them is big. For instance, when European capitalism encountered the native societies in America and the Caribbean, the native societies were almost wiped out. Second, if the weaker society survives, it can only regain independence by reaching a higher level of development than the economy that dominated it before. The experiences of the Soviet Union, China, and Korea show examples of the second rule in action. Modern underdevelopment is closely tied to the exploitation of one country by another. All the countries labeled as underdeveloped are being exploited, and this underdevelopment is a result of capitalist, imperialist, and colonialist exploitation. African and Asian societies were on their own development paths until capitalist powers took over, leading to increased exploitation and the export of surplus resources. This deprived these societies of the benefits of their natural resources and labor, making underdevelopment a significant issue today. What do I mean by these underdeveloped countries that were on their own development paths? When we think about Africa or Asia, many Westerners think about them as backwards people who live in deserts, who have no development, are authoritarian, and when the Europeans arrived to these countries, they were empty lands and people lived a different lifestyle, so they brought democracy and civilization. Many of these countries had a glorious past and lived a decent life in the present. For example, Egypt, the oldest culture in Africa. Egypt's ancient glory under the pharaohs is well known. Under the Fatimid dynasty's rule, Egypt experienced flourishing of science and the rise in industrial activity. New technologies like windmills and water wheels were introduced, and various industries including papermaking, sugar refining, porcelain, and gasoline distillation emerged. Textile, leather, and metal industries were also improved. Successive dynasties like the Ayyubids and the Mamluks made notable contributions, particularly in building canals, dams, bridges, and aqueducts, as well as fostering commerce with Europe. Ethiopia. Ethiopia is another country with a long history of Christian tradition dating back to the 4th century. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is one of the oldest Christian churches in Africa and in the world, and it has played an important role in Ethiopian culture and society. Ethiopia is also older than the European Christians. The oldest Christians are in Armenia and Ethiopia. Funnily enough, some say that the West is built on its Judeo-Christian values, but exclude Armenia, which is in Asia, and Ethiopia in Africa. As an empire that incorporated various smaller states and kingdoms, Ethiopia resembled feudal Austria or Prussia. Impressive architectural achievements reflected the skill of Ethiopians, and Ethiopia's wealth was rooted in agriculture, with fertile uplands supporting cereal crops and livestock, including horses. Craft skills flourished, and foreign craftsmen such as Turkish artisans and Coptics from Egypt contributed to Ethiopian society. Nubia. Nubia, another Christian region in Africa, isn't as well known as Ethiopia. In the 6th century AD, Christianity arrived in the Middle Nile, once ruled by the powerful state of Kush. Scholars have studied the remains of large red brick churches and monasteries in Nubia with high-quality murals and frescoes. From this evidence, we can see that building these structures required a lot of labor, similar to the pyramids in Egypt or feudal castles in Europe. Skilled labor was also involved in making bricks and in the architecture of these structures. The paintings and artistic pottery fragments found in Nubia suggest that the builders had skills beyond just manual work. The Maghreb. In the Maghreb region, Islam played a key role. The Islamic Empire expanded across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Like Islamic Egypt and Christian Nubia, the Maghreb inherited a rich history, including the famous Carthaginian society blending influences from the Eastern Mediterranean with the Berber people. Muslim Maghreb excelled in naval, military, commercial, and cultural achievements. Its navies controlled the Western Mediterranean, and its armies conquered much of Portugal and Spain. Although the Muslim advance into Europe was halted in 732 AD, North African armies had already entered France. After being expelled from Spain in the 1230s, the Maghreb Muslims, also known as Moors, continued to maintain their dynamic society in Africa. As an example of their advanced social life, public baths were common in Maghreb cities, time when in Oxford there were still concerns about the safety of washing the body. Violence in the colonies does not only have for its aim the keeping of these enslaved men at arm's length, it seeks to dehumanize them. Everything will be done to wipe out their traditions, to substitute the natives' language for theirs, and to destroy the culture without giving to the natives. Starved and ill, if they have any spirit left, fear will finish the job. And if he shows fight, the soldiers fire and he is a dead man. If he gives in, he degrades himself and he is no longer a man at all. Neither in the Congo, where Negroes' hands were cut off, nor in Angola, where until very recently their lips were pierced in order to shut them with padlocks. Because of the dehumanization done to Arabs, Africans, and Asians, it is easier for the Western man to judge them, and in the case of the colonized, if they take arms or use violence as defense, the colonized are considered subhuman or terrorists. It is the same cycle over and over again. We see it with the language they use, the way they transmit the news, the way the colonizer behaves, and what methods he uses to shut down the colonized.
Why were the Europeans able to conquer North and South America? It's not what a lot of people think. A lot of people think that the Europeans were able to colonize the Americas because they had better technology. And that's not really true. The Europeans did have some technologies that the indigenous peoples did not have. So they had ironworking, they had gunpowder weapons, but those things in and of themselves were not sufficient. There are actually a lot of myths surrounding the European colonization of the Americas. I'm not really going to get into them in this video. There are myths like the Aztecs were overawed by the Spanish. They thought the Spanish were gods. They were scared of the horses that the Spanish brought. All that's not true. The Europeans were able to colonize the Americas not because they had better technology, but because they had diseases that the people of the Americas did not have resistance to. Because back in the Eastern Hemisphere, people had lived alongside domesticated animals. And when you live alongside other species in very close proximity, sometimes diseases will jump from some other species, from your livestock, to humans. By and large, humans in the Western Hemisphere did not live alongside animals in close proximity. And that meant there were fewer pathogens jumping from other species to humans in North and South America. So they had fewer diseases. When the Europeans and the Africans came to the Americas, they brought with them the pathogens that existed in Europe and Africa. And they came to the Americas where the people had never encountered these diseases before, and the indigenous people of the Americas died in very large numbers. During the first 150 years after European contact, roughly between the years 1500 and 1650, the indigenous population of the Americas declined by 90%. It was 10% in 1650, what it had been in 1500. So because the indigenous population was so devastated by the pathogens brought over from the Eastern Hemisphere, that made it possible for the Europeans to colonize North and South America. The Europeans were not more advanced than the other Asian and African kingdoms. When the Portuguese were visiting the African kingdoms in the late 1400s, they were interacting with them as equals. And they would talk about them like, here's another kingdom, it's the kingdom of Congo, and we're a kingdom and they're a kingdom. And that was the attitude they had at that time. It was only later on that the Europeans got an attitude of massive superiority toward the Africans. Why is it that the Europeans were able to colonize Africa and Asia in the late 1800s? And the answer now is technology. Now it is. Because what changed was, beginning in the late 1700s, the Industrial Revolution started happening. And then it got into full swing during the 1800s. And the Industrial Revolution was huge. It is the most significant, most consequential thing that has happened to the human race in 10,000 years. Because it dramatically changed everything about how we live our lives, about everything, about how war is done, but not just war, about how the economy works, about what kinds of jobs we work, about what kind of lifestyle we have. Everything, if you look around in your daily life, every single thing that's there in your daily life is there because of industrialization, and would not be there if it had not been for industrialization.
In Eric Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery, he clearly shows how slavery was closely linked to the growth of England. He highlights the benefits England gained from trading and exploiting slaves, namely individuals and companies involved. For example, David and Alexander Barclay, who engaged in slave trade in 1756, used the profits to establish Barclays Bank. Lloyd's, starting as a small coffee house in London, became a major banking and insurance house by profiting from slave trade and slavery. Even James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine, received financial support from West Indian slave owners, helping turn his idea into reality. Europe gained significant benefits from controlling global commerce, particularly from Africa's major contribution to its development. European scholars often treated their continent's economy as if it were independent, but in reality the interconnectedness between European economies and the world was well understood by economists in the 19th century. During the 17th, 18th and most of the 19th centuries, Africa and African labor was essential for accumulating capital reinvested in Western Europe. This contribution extended in crucial sectors like shipping, insurance, company formation, capitalist agriculture technology, and machinery manufacturing. The effects were far-reaching, impacting industries like the French fishing industry and Portuguese dye production. Gum from Africa played a role in the textile industry, a powerful engine of European economic growth. The export of ivory from Africa enriched merchants in London and provided raw materials for industries in England, France, Germany, Switzerland, and North America used for items ranging from knife handles to piano keys. Africa's integration into Western Europe accelerated the latter's technological development. For instance, the evolution of European shipbuilding from the 16th to the 19th century was a logical consequence of their sea commerce monopoly during that period. Despite initial borrowings from North Africans in nautical instrumentation, North Africans made no further significant advances during this time, as they were confined to the Mediterranean. Capitalism, like any system, has an ideological side, and it's essential to look at how connections with Africa influenced ideas in European capitalist society. One notable result is the widespread rise of racism in European thought. The link between slavery and racist beliefs, particularly in the USA, has been studied. Enslaving people for centuries leads to a sense of superiority, especially when physical traits differ, resulting in racist prejudices. In South Africa's Cape Province since 1650, white men established military and social dominance over non-whites, reflecting a similar situation within Africa itself. By the 19th century, white racism became deeply ingrained in the capitalist world, sometimes even overshadowing profit motives in oppressing black people, especially in the USA. While initially seeming harmless to Europeans, these racist ideas justified their domination of non-European people during colonization. However, the global spread of these prejudiced and unscientific ideas had negative consequences in the long run. The institutionalization of white racism eventually clashed with democratic ideals within Europe. For example, during the Holocaust, where millions of Jews were placed in ovens by the Nazis, the repercussions of these racist ideas became evident. The contradiction between democratic principles and authoritarian practices towards Africans persisted throughout European history, even during events like the French Revolution, which, despite proclaiming liberty and equality, did not extend these principles to enslaved Black Africans. Developed economies differ from underdeveloped ones in key ways. Developed countries are industrialized, meaning most of their workforce is in industries like factories, and their wealth comes from advanced technology and skills. They have high labor productivity due to their advanced methods. More than just trade, ownership of production means in one country by citizens of another is crucial. When Europeans own African land and mines, it directly drains wealth from Africa. This results in Africa's wealth flowing out of the continent. Socially and culturally, underdeveloped countries often stay connected to the capitalist system while relying on the developed countries. The Christian Church has played a significant role in cultural influence despite efforts to establish independent churches. Education is crucial, shaping Africans to serve the capitalist system and adopt its values. New universities in Africa serve imperialist interests at the highest academic level. Even something as basic as language contributes to integration and dependence. The widespread use of French and English in Africa is more for communication with exploiters than among Africans themselves. Overall, it's challenging to find a sphere that doesn't reflect economic dependence and structural integration. It is important to recognize the mistakes of the past and be better in the present and future. Unfortunately, most of the history censors many important events and makes the winners glorious and the losers evil or incapable of doing anything. We still learn about the world's division as first, second, and third world. Initially, these terms were used during wars to indicate the position that a country would take towards the USA or Soviet Union. But now it is used as a way to dehumanize and indicate that certain people are less than others. The underdeveloped aren't that way just for fun. They were once developed and living a decent life until circumstances changed and they were stolen or killed. It is important to question ourselves and understand our fellow human beings who live in other parts of the world instead of belittling them. You should be grateful for what you have and your lifestyle because the people whom you call backwards, uncivilised, and worthless are working for you and suffering in bad working conditions so you can enjoy the pleasures of life. Thank the children of Congo, the women of China, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Thank the men who are working in mines with no conditions so you can drive your car or have a good quality makeup product. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.